All right, so hi everyone. My name is Jide Alakija. I am a British-born Nigerian, in case all of you are wondering why I talk funny. That is how you pronounce my name. I've had all sorts of variations and iterations, Jide, Alakija, all sorts of things like that. And I like to call myself a wedding, fine art, and documentary photographer, or rather street photographer. My street photography influences my wedding work, and my wedding work influences my street photography work. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about this thing called light composition and moment, which essentially is my approach to how I capture my photographs. I'm going to first present to you my street work. I'm not really going to talk too much about that, but then talk about really how my wedding photography is kind of how I use wedding photography to kind of improve my, my approach to capturing moments. So here is a slideshow. I hope you enjoy it, of some of the street photography I've done while I've been traveling. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so that pretty much is what I'm kind of about, and I try and relate that into my wedding photography. And I relate it with, obviously, the kind of gear that I have, which is I believe in operating with as minimalist as possible. I don't know how many of you were here for Susan's brilliant talk yesterday. Yeah? She was talking about gear and all that kind of stuff. I generally try to shoot with very, very little equipment. I use a Nikon D750 just purely because not only is it a great camera, it's also really light as well. I try to also limit my lens choices to these lenses that I have over here, and then using as the speed lights that I need to use for whatever I need to use them, and then also modifiers and LEDs. This is generally what I have to go through when I'm in my day job. I've shot a lot of weddings in rural West Africa and also in some really major cities as well. This is a situation that some people can identify with, I assume. First of all, show of how many people are wedding photographers over here? Just want to get a good sense. Please raise your hands as high as you can. Awesome, thank you. So I need to hear more claps from you guys. And then, yeah, sometimes it's this whole issue I've always found myself in, which is there are so many photographers today. A lot of iPhone photographers, or iPhonographers as you call them, a lot of people with DSLRs like these. And I've kind of found myself in this, whoops, oh, okay. I found myself in this situation where I am trying to present something that is somewhat different from what the world has probably seen. So this is my mantra. This is like my mission statement. I want to put as much energy as I can into capturing every single moment that I encounter, I sort of come across. Because I'm not just shooting for today or tomorrow. I'm shooting for the next 20 years and beyond. Essentially, I'm trying to capture as many memories as possible. My job is to be a documentarian, someone who is here to capture the history, the story of the people that I'm being hired to photograph. For instance, here, this is a photograph of a groom, extremely excited, carrying his son and waving him around on a dance floor. And the same thing as well in terms of trying my best to capture every moment that I see that I feel kind of touches me. So for instance, this particular moment is one where a bride walking up the aisle by herself gets to the steps, and her grandmother, who's been walking with a walker, decides that that was the day she was going to throw the walker away and walk with her granddaughter down the aisle because obviously her dad's not there. And the bride sees her grandmother walking and really struggling because you can see the hand of the gentleman trying to help her out, and she's completely touched by this moment. I think I'm about 30 meters away next to the groom trying to capture her walk, and I noticed this moment, and I'm like, oh my God, this is probably something really amazing. And as in English terms, we say we leg it down all the way down the aisle towards her, and I'm sure I pissed off the videographer at this point, to try and capture this moment. Because I feel like you want to get as close as you can to really feel what that moment is all about. So the general rule about light composition moments in every single moment that I try to capture is just three main things. First, appreciating the light that you have seen. Finding the light, finding the best exposure that you need, working the scene, working your composition to find the composition that will aid in the story that you're trying to tell, and then now shooting till you get the moment that you want. What was that? All right, so if there's anything here that resonates with you, I would like you to do something for me. Could you snap your fingers? Yeah? Awesome, thank you. It also kind of keeps me engaged with you guys. So I'm going to show you right now an example of a scene where I'm employing this same technique. So this is a bride getting into her car. And the natural thing is to photograph the bride getting into the car. And in my own thing, I'd like to sort of capture a moment. So I first of all get the exposure that I want. I keep trying to find the composition. I'm trying to tell a story of the location. This is in South Kensington in London, which is typified by the background. And I'm putting that into my composition. And I'm still clicking, then I think maybe I should put the Rolls Royce wheel in there, just to kind of show that she had a Rolls Royce. Well, that didn't really work out the way I wanted. Then I try something else which is different. I keep clicking. Then she's aware of me clicking. I'm not talking to her. She's like, oh, wow. Then she's like, this is awkward. And she turns around and then now looks forward. Still trying to wait for this moment. And then it gets more interesting as her bridesmaid comes in. Now I see a relationship developing. And then she says, hey, oh, she blows a kiss to her, which is awesome. And then she's like, oh, can you take a photograph of me? I don't think this photographer is doing his job. She's like, yeah. She goes to a sunken place, grabs the camera, boom, Peter Hurley style. Anyway, gets a photo. Yeah, that's exactly what I want. As you can see, she's raising her hand. A third person gets into the scene. But anyway, that has led to this moment. Whoops, go back. That has led to this moment, which, in my opinion, is more than just her getting into the car, because the car is there, but it's also showing the relationship she has with a bridesmaid before she's about to embark on this amazing journey of getting married. So, how do we define a moment? I'm going to ask for a few of hands. Anyone want to answer this question? Any hands? Yes, sir. All right, so it brings about emotion, and through that emotion, you can kind of feel some sort of capture. Does anyone want to try again as well? I could just do one more. Anyone? Yes, sir. Spontaneity. Yeah, that's sort of spontaneity. And exactly, you just kind of see something there. So there is a sort of, I went in there kind of researching myself, trying to find out what exactly is a moment. And I went to the Oxford Dictionary to kind of get what a moment was, what the official definition of a moment was. It says a very brief period of time, an appropriate time for doing something or an opportunity, a particular stage in development of something or in the course of event. By the way, I actually prefer your definitions to this definition. I think this definition is missing something, which is something that we see in our photos. And I think when the definition of a moment was obviously written in the dictionary, they didn't consult with photographers. This is, for me, the best definition that I can find out there. This is by Don McCullin, who says, photography for me is not looking, it's feeling. If you can't feel what you're looking at, then you're never going to get others to feel anything when they look at your pictures. And I think this is what really I look for whenever I'm trying to capture a moment. I'm trying to capture something that is going to generate some sort of feeling, something that would kind of captivate you, something that you can relate to. So let's start off with the first element in my approach, light. Light obviously being the thing that we do. Exposing for highlights is the first, very, very first thing you've got to do. At least, if anything, kind of making sure that the highlight itself is the main thing, but using the highlight to capture your moment. For instance, in this particular setting here, this was one of these very awkward situations where the light was actually behind the subject. And sometimes you're like, oh my God, do I actually go behind them in this situation and kind of, make a mess of myself, or do I go to the front where everyone else can see them? And I kind of came up with the idea of like, you know what, just use the highlight and then just kind of keep shooting till you get the moment. Also, there are situations where you can make the highlight the subject, i.e. the light is in front of your subject. In this situation, I think this is pretty obvious. I've here posed this particular bride, and then I think I cracked the funniest joke of the world, and she kind of, responded to that. And also, it's also important to hide your light sources. So many times as a starting photographer, we kind of see a great moment and we just go ahead and capture it, but sometimes forget that the reason why that moment is there is because of this light source, which actually is the main attention. And cropping that out is actually more important, I feel, than anything else, because you don't want anything taking away from that moment. This is a great quote from one of my friends, Jeff Cook. He says that if the light is shit, make good light. Don't go using good light to photograph good shit. This is actually what we all do when we start off as photographers, especially when we get all technical. Oh my God, that's amazing light. And we go all photographing all that light, but it's actually nothing interesting. For those of you interested, this is actually a photograph taken with 3 different types of lights, or 2 different types of light, but 3 different lights, 2-speed lights and 1 video light. The 2-speed lights are gelled behind the subject, and the video light is actually what's lighting up the subject. That's actually the entrance to the toilet, to the restroom at a hotel. So essentially what happened was the light was shit, and we had to kind of create something more interesting in that situation. So this is an illustration of how we can actually use good light, or what we think is good light, and create some really interesting photographs here. So here, this is the elevator. Because that was the only place that had some really interesting light where we were. We're photographing them in a Steinway showroom because they wanted some really nice pianos. I put them into the elevator. I see that the light is really good from up here. So what do? I let the light dictate the pose. But then light is not really that amazing. So I then now that light because we have some highlights on their forehead and want to kind of improve that. So we put another light with a video light, and we create this situation. And I'm using that same pose, I now try, and as I always do, get an alternative of that. Whenever I start photographing a scene, I start off with something really simple. This is, again, very, very simple situation, very, very simple light. As I'm shooting, I'm also looking for more alternatives. And I notice that we have a reflective surface in the background over there. I'm like, we could do something really interesting. So what it kind of looks like close up. So I now put the couple behind me. I take my video light again, and I'm shooting into the reflective surface to produce the reflection. And of course, through the same moment of LCM, I'm able to capture more moments. Same couple. I'm moving around looking for really interesting light. I see this really interesting situation, really good light. But then it's really, really dark between the couple, so I give the groom the video light so he's holding it in between himself and the bride, or his bride, should I say. But then as I'm shooting, I also notice that this is a situation that has some great light. Because someone tell me where the light is. That's really interesting right now. What's that, sir? The stained glass. Great stuff. So the stained glass comes in there, and I'm like, oh my God, this is pretty interesting. We could do something with it. And boom. Right? And this is even more interesting in the sense that now I don't even need to use a video light anymore, and I can actually create something more interesting. This is the Steinway piano because they really wanted the piano into the picture, and I thought, I don't want to do the same thing of having the groom playing the piano and have the bride laying on top of the piano because these pianos are really expensive, and I don't think my insurance covers that. So I put them on the floor, and I think Dennis, who's over here, was actually helping me hold the light in this situation. And this is just a simple thing. It's kind of finding little crevices and really interesting things and then just using video lights to try and create that. Let's go to composition. So composition is about finding the best place to take your photographs to kind of get the best angle, right? But did you also know that composition is also about arranging things? You may want to move things around. You want to put your subject in front of you, you want to push them further away. Sometimes we've missed that. This is a photograph I took in Turkey somewhere. And we went out into the city, and I saw this sign, and I thought, oh, we have to do something with that, because it was low enough for me to create a perspective of that, put the couple into that connection, and we have that particular moment. And that's, again, what composition is about, right? All right, so I use this method called rotisserie chicken or roti chicken. And rotisserie chicken essentially is whenever you see a particular scene that's really interesting, like a rotisserie, you're going around. So essentially, you're going around that whole scene to try and find the best story you can. So let's look at this example. I start off with the simple story of the couple doing their first dance, and then I see some onlookers enjoying it, and I'm like, cool, but it doesn't look as interesting. I go around, try a different perspective. I now notice that both their parents are observing, so I'm like, okay, something is interesting over here. So I keep shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting, find the composition I want. I even go for the safe shot. That's the safe shot. Then I'm like, fine, I need to get something more interesting. And I notice the mom's really interested. Like, her reaction is like, wow. Then they start to applaud. I'm like, bam, we've got the moment. Right? And I feel, again, this is, again, the story that we're looking for, which is they're having their first dance. There's a really good reaction to what's actually happening in this sense. Look for frames everywhere you can. You have frames in different things. Frames kind of help you kind of focus your story, focus your ideas. Wherever you see them, try and use these frames to try and tell your stories. Here, for instance, now, I noticed whilst the bride was getting married, not getting married, was having her makeup done, the kids were playing outside on the balcony. And I thought, this is really interesting. How can I tell a story of the kids playing while she's having her makeup done? I could obviously take a photograph from indoors with them in the background, but the problem with that is all the light is coming from the background, right? And there's no way I'm going to be able to focus on the kids and have her at the same time exposed. I'm going to have to, there's a big trade-off in that regard. So what do? I actually go outside and lift my wrist, which you can probably see is actually the reason why, what's actually allowing you to see what she's actually seeing. And at the same time now, let the kids do whatever they're doing. I'm trying so hard to keep my arm up there, at the same time hoping that this child is going to do some really interesting acrobatics. And she's running up and down. I think I was there for about a good 6 minutes because she's like, curious, like, what am I doing and stuff like that. Layering is also something that's really, really big when it comes to composition. And layering, in my opinion, is kind of taking different stories and different elements and putting them all together to try and make a bigger story. So essentially, whenever you see something happening in a scene, always think about the reaction of that thing that's happening as well. What else is happening? There's a very, very touching speech happening in this particular moment, to which the bride is very, very responsive to because she starts to shed a tear. Now, you're also listening to that speech because it's also touching you too. So if it's touching you, it's probably touching somebody else. So you've got to think and start looking for a viewpoint that would complement this story to emphasize that speech. If possible, even show the speech maker as well, if you can, in this particular moment. It's pretty much the same thing over here. Groom is having a really, really tender moment with the bride's mother in this situation. Completely touched by that situation is the bride. In fact, over here, I have a video light by my assistant. I think we have a language that we speak whenever I'm shooting in receptions, because people always ask me, like, how do you always get the light right on the background? And I'm like, I just point to whatever it is, and my assistant kind of knows exactly what I'm trying to do. So he has an understanding of my approach. So on my on-camera flash will light the foreground, because I use the bounce card, and my assistant has the flash on a monopod, which will light the background. Again, bride and groom being hoisted into the hoisted up anyway, together. And those situations I find are really, really interesting. And it doesn't always happen a lot in a lot of African weddings. And when they do, people get very excited by them. And that excitement is actually what I'm really interested in. So instead of just focusing on the bride and groom, which is what everyone is doing with their camera, I'm going to focus on the other person who's actually taking that photograph. Essentially, I'm trying to focus on the reaction and tell a story of that, because I think it's a lot deeper. For some reason, when I was going through my making these the slideshow, I realized I just have a lot of photographs of people crying for some weird reason. So, so yeah, whenever I find, one of the things I'm always looking for whenever there's a bridal procession is emotion, especially having sort of listened throughout the whole day to, the bridesmaids being so excited, looking forward to the actual wedding itself. I know one of these people is going to cry. So at that point, I position myself in a place where I feel, or I think I'm going to see the best viewpoint for what's going to happen. Usually the person that I think is going to cry the most, because they're usually the loudest. I also like using this thing called the rule of threes. Essentially, whenever I see something happening, I'm always asking, what are the other two things that are happening? What are the, what else can I use to complement and create a triangle out of? So I could have 3 birds observing 3 other birds putting the dress down, for instance. Or on a rainy day, you have 3 bridesmaids keeping themselves together. Selfie lights are also really, really cool. I think there was actually a 4th person, but I think I cropped out the 4th person, if I'm correct, in order to get the rule of threes to work for me. Perspective is also so important when it comes to composition. I usually use one of 4 different perspectives. I either go very low, just so that I don't get in the way of the videographer, but also you're also able to clear the distractions in the background. I also noticed the line of all the phones as this moment is about to happen, as the bride and groom are about to jump over the broom. And I create a line of the phones just by going very low. Same thing here. The same gesture with her hands, I think pretty much tells you everything. I actually think if I cropped off her hands, or her hand in this particular moment, I don't think it would be as strong as it is right now. The second perspective is shooting high. I don't only shoot high because I want to get a different perspective from above. In this particular moment, I want to see his eyes, because I think his eyes tell you everything about what's actually happening in this moment. And the same thing over here. Everyone, like I said, these are the people I'm competing with nowadays at weddings with their iPhones. And then the third perspective is what I call the anchoring environment perspective. Essentially, trying to show the story from the perspective of where we are. So what I mean by that is I find an anchor point in the environment, and I stay there, and I let everything happen and move within that space. Because everything is all about the environment at this point, but what's actually happening in the environment. So like this situation of their first dance, because that chandelier tells you everything. They're on the beach, but at the same time, it's kind of bringing in the ballroom effect as well. Or the bride and groom making their entrance into their ceremony. In fact, in this particular situation, the bride had already told me how much she was looking forward to the reception because of how much time she had spent in putting up the decor. And I just felt at this point the best way to capture this is really to include her and her husband in this setup. And also, you also want to give an idea of where we're at, the magnitude of what's actually happening. And this is one where you have, again, a bridal procession with her dad walking down the aisle, and the whole landscape of Dubai just kind of really presenting itself. It really kind of gives you a good feeling of what the magnitude and scale of this wedding. Then the final perspective I also always try and share with it, I always try and use is the close perspective, kind of getting really tight in to really get a sense of being the third person. And what I mean by the third person is, let's say you have two people being very emotive, be the third person in that sort of connection. That third person also happens when is also you're not also just the third person when people are crying, but also maybe when they're dancing. You just want to kind of feel what they're feeling. Closeness just really kind of makes you understand what it is this person is going through, or how this moment is for them. So the final thing to look back again in my approach is a moment. This is the most important thing that anyone who really wants to capture great moments needs to take on board. You've got to stay present. And what does that mean? Here's a moment where a bride and groom, or the bride is actually feeding the groom after they've cut the cake. Usually in a Nigerian wedding, and probably West African wedding, you have what we call like an officiator who guides them in how the cake cutting process is supposed to happen. I'm not really sure why, but someone needs to tell you how to eat. Now, in this particular moment, most photographers, or should I say the idea from what I've seen from photographers is we're heading for this shot, right? And then we get it, and then we now do this thing where we kind of look down and we chimp, and then we miss this shot, which is, right? And this is a situation where you have to be present, because it's only by being present that you do truly catch these moments. Because the moments themselves don't happen when you expect them to happen. They happen usually after you expect them to happen, right? This is a shot of the bridal party. We're expecting to get a great shot of them. Boom, we've got it. Now they're looking at the camera. Then we look down, and then Bob comes by with his bike, and he's like, "Hi, guys." Do you know what I mean? You've always got to keep the camera where you need it to be, because you just don't know what's going to happen. Never, even when I put the camera down, it's on my chest. Always like this, right? If I'm going to crack a joke, like this. Same thing. Actually, this is all about what I call LEMs, limbs, eyes, and mouth. But it's the same thing here again. Because we're like, oh, I want to capture a moment, and maybe she's doing her thing, and you're like, right, I've got the moment. But then you can't really understand what she's going through until you show her a picture like that, right? And why LEMs are so important is that photograph really says the message of what she's going through just by the gesture in her face, and her face being her eyes, her mouth, and her hands, right? I don't think I need to explain anything that's happening over here, but that's really the whole point. This is actually a very, very telling moment here. Groom anticipating the arrival of his wife. But what's even interesting here is the fact that then he gets really emotional. He turns away. And what really is so key to me is not so much the fact that he lifts his hand up like this, but it's actually the gesture of his best man putting his arm over to comfort him, right? Because this happens afterwards. And you can tell, like, this is something that he's been looking forward to for a very, very long time. So he'll never forget. The whole point about staying present is it's also looking for something deeper than what you expect. In this particular situation, the groom had the most extroverted, energetic groomsmen I have ever met. They took over, and again, they were also competing with me because they decided to bring all their cameras with them. And wanted to capture this moment better than I would. But in a situation where you find those things happening, you've always got to try and include them. A lot of the times we're like, oh my gosh, why these guys with their iPhones and stuff like that? Quite frankly, I've stopped fighting them, and I just kind of put them into the scene. You've also got to try and ride your luck sometimes, right? Rule of threes. Whenever I see a screen in a room, I'm always constantly looking at it like, oh, how can I get this into the, into the whole story? How is it that I can tell a story? I don't know how many of you are soccer fans, football fans, right? And you probably noticed that's a fan from the football club Southampton FC. He clearly approves of the bride. and the bride approves of his gesture too. But you've always got to find interesting, deep things when things happen. Sometimes Little John shows up to your wedding. Again, this is me just kind of looking at the screen and kind of trying to get a sense of how I can include that. And I think I must have been here for about 10 minutes photographing this same shot because I wasn't satisfied with the people that were coming up on the scene. But I think what really, really got my heart was when that gesture of him going, came up, because clearly he approves of the bride as well. Okay, so let's talk about portraits. This is an example of how I would use this same technique to photograph a portrait scene. Again, I do love sort of pose standard portraits, but I also want to bring out more. I want you to feel something in the portrait. I want you to sense who these couples are. All right, so I'm going to show you a slideshow.
Ghost with a name, it used to haunt me, taunt me with shackles and chains. When I used to believe, but the ghost was alive and hollow inside. Her body still warm and the tears in her eyes. She wouldn't leave. She wouldn't leave. For long years and I know where I've been. I've been stuck up in a slow rewind from the sweat of my mind. It comes and it goes from the shadows below, yet hung high, so I laid low. Now I leave it behind, leave it behind.
All right, so thank you. I've not showed you the final bit yet, but anyway. Okay, so that's what's kind of led to this, right? Someone asked me a question, was like, did you intentionally choose the background because what she's wearing and what he's wearing is so synonymous with the background? And I was like, kind of. We were walking down the streets of Shoreditch, and I noticed that they were wearing these colors, and then I saw this background. I thought, okay, this is actually going to work. But really the point of this is such a sort of vibrant couple that prior to the session, I did ask them to come dressed as they did because we were going to a very vibrant environment. I don't know if you noticed throughout the session itself, I changed the perspective from having the windows there to taking them out. So essentially what was happening was I was shooting them as everything was happening, and I wasn't getting what I wanted. So I was like, okay, guys, I need to do that again. I need to do that again. I need to do that again. And each time they were doing it, they were losing patience with me each time. And I thought, okay, do you know what? I want you guys to resist holding each other. So this time, I want you to pull as hard as you can in the opposite direction. And please don't cheat. Don't let her win. Really, really pull her back. And this is exactly what's actually happening over here. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Here I have a groom who doesn't actually know how to dance. So I'm just telling him, just fling your arms like this. Keep doing that. And my saving grace is I have a Bluetooth speaker, which is not in this frame. And I usually get my couples to listen to some music that they love. And using that track, they're not focused on me. They're not going to be saying things like, are we done yet? Are we done yet? Have you got it yet? Because now they're just having a good time. And I'm just capturing them in their own elements. All right, I'm going to show you a slideshow of some of my best portraits. I hope you enjoy it. So, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. So to summarize, revere the light. The light is the number one thing that you always got to take hold of. Always position yourself where you can get your best light. Find your best composition, because that's where your story is going to happen. Try and get your moment. Well, I was just going to ask questions if you have any.
I see that you captured a moment. I know that requires patience.
Yes.
And in that, you take a lot of photos.
Yes.
How do you decipher between, like, what are you going to use? And, I mean, I just noticed that I, too, like to capture that moment.
Right.
And how do you go, like, okay, this is the one?
Yeah.
Deciding that.
Right. So, the question is really about how do you set your story? Whenever I go into a situation, be it on the streets or in a wedding, I spend a bit of time trying to piece out what's going on and who the people are. Are they extroverts? Are they people who are very flamboyant? Are they party people? Are they really sort of private, solemn people? And based on that information that I've picked up about them, I then now use that to try and look for where I can get moments that will fit them. So say, for instance, now I find, in the case, these people are I meet a bride or a groom, and I'm speaking to him or her, and he says, we just want to party. We're going to have the party of parties. I know already that throughout the day, I'm looking, or I'm also expecting to have moments of that nature. If I meet someone who's not really giving me too much, then they're probably really private people. Then I know immediately I'm going to look for moments like that. I'm going to look for lighting like that. That's what kind of feeds the inspiration throughout the day. But then I also know I have a target of number of images that I want to make. Say in a wedding, if you have about 8 or 9 hours, I want to make about 10 images per hour, 10 great images. And I kind of I have a whole hour to make 10 images. So I work like that. Any questions?
Testing 1, 2.
How much post-production work goes into your photos?
How much post-production work? I use a preset at the moment. I have developed a preset with a company called Develop. In fact, I had a presentation that I was going to give to you guys about that. Unfortunately, I don't have it here today. But if you go to Develop, www.develop.com, and type in the code Jide, J-I-D-E, or you can come and speak to me afterwards. Essentially, all I do is I just apply the preset. It gives the images the color that I want. And then I now just do a tiny bit of dodge and burn. And it takes me about anything from 30 seconds to 5 minutes per image. Is that a lot or too little, too much? Yes, it's J-I-D-E. J for Juliet, I for India, D for Delta, E for Echo. So it's D for Delta, V for Victor, L for Lima, O for Oscar, P for Papa, BHPhoto.com. And you can look for my name on there. Yes, sir.
Question.
Sorry, we have a mic? Sorry.
Oh, question. We'll
sorry.
appreciate your presentation.
Yes, of course.
3 short questions. What lenses did you use? How many shooters you had?
Yeah.
And what was your lighting for lighting up the rooms?
Yeah, okay. Those are 3 questions. All right, so, lenses. Generally, I stick to 2 main lenses, 85 millimeters and 35 millimeters. 85 for pretty pictures, 35 for storytelling pictures. I would then use a 28 when things get very tight and I can't sort of get the compositions that I want. Sometimes I would use a 50 if I have a 50 on me, if things are not looking pretty, but I also want to tell stories. So it's like a 35 storytelling pretty lens. So that's kind of my approach. Second, additional shooters, I usually work with a second shooter, but usually all the pictures I showed you were all my pictures. Finally, lighting. My approach to lighting is based on what exists already and how can I improve on that lighting. So I would use, say, in this room, I have 3 chandeliers, and I love this go-go design. So I would make that my main sort of lighting feature. But then, because these are already main lights, I then now have to have an additional light on my subject. So I would have an assistant on a monopod with a speed light. Yeah? So someone asked a question before. Yes?
Hi, we noticed that you use the environment so well. You do such a great job of framing your subjects with the environment.
Thanks.
How did you get to that point of knowledge and skill set? Was it self-taught, repetition, like Peter Hurley said earlier, or was it actual schooling at what point?
So I started off actually doing more landscape photography before I actually went into wedding photography. And I shot a lot of landscapes. And I always tell people, shoot landscapes because it helps you appreciate space very well. Not just a beautiful sort of scene, but also a beautiful room. And if you can photograph things like that from a landscape perspective, it helps. Another thing that also helps me, again, is paintings. There's a really, really cool painter by the name of Kenton Nelson. He's based in LA. He's very good at photographing. He's a painter, but he paints sort of scenes, but with really, really interesting sort of compositions. So I take a lot of my inspiration from him. So I see his painting, I'm like, wow, I love the way he's photographed a whole group of farmers on a scene. I could pose my bridal party like that. And I go into a scene where I'm like, that looks like the scene that I want. I now just need to fill it in with the different bits and pieces. And that's how I work. So I just photograph, get the exposure for the scene, put all the bits and pieces in there, and then I light what I need. Okay?
Hi. So you obviously get very close to your subjects. And
Yes.
How do you deal with videographers and kind of just, trying to be good friends with everyone and getting a shot?
Oh, yeah. I don't have many friends in this industry. But, okay, so as far as you probably shoot a lot of East Asian, South Asian weddings, right? So, and they also have the same situation I have where you have a lot of people coming into the scene. I actually don't compete with them. I just stay out of their way and I let them take the photographs they want and I find another perspective that they're not taking. That's usually my approach. And my argument is this, that they're taking the shot that I want. So I'm kind of repeating exactly what they're doing. And the couple are going to see that photo too because they've taken it. And they're probably going to see it before my photo comes out. And it's not going to look like, wow, because their camera is as good. So I'm looking for a fresh perspective that I'm not seeing. So I may try maybe shooting from a different angle, or I wait till something else happens. And I usually find another perspective that they're not seeing. And also their lighting is usually shit. So but it is usually. And so therefore I try and look for a perspective where I have better light. So that's my approach. I've given up fighting with iPhonographers and videographers because I'm like, it's not going to work for me. So, like for instance, I'll give you an example. First kiss. I used to photograph the first kiss from the middle of the aisle. Nowadays, I speak to the officiant before the kiss happens, and I tell him if I can stand next to him when that's going to happen. Normally he calls me up and he gets out of the way, and I'm the guy now there, like the officiant with the camera, and now I've got everyone in the photo, right? And then the videographer's like, you know, so angry. But the point is, I can obviously hide him, but now I've gotten my picture. I mean, I don't try to be overly intrusive in that situation. I tell the videographer, like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. Do you want to come along with me? And usually he has the same problem with everybody else, if he is a good videographer, if you understand what I mean. So, yeah.
Jide?
Yes.
Hi, I have 2 questions for you. Given the number of frames that I see you take to
Yes.
get the one image that you're happy with, so during a typical wedding day, like how many frames would you say you captured throughout the day, and ultimately, how many do you give to the client?
Couple, yeah. Oh, man. Okay, so, and I'm gasping because I'm changing that. Okay, so I used to do 20,000 in a wedding. Now, yeah. Now, and then I give them, say, 600. Now, I'm cutting that down to about 10,000. So 20,000 between myself and my second shooter, by the way. It's not just me. But I'm cutting it down. And the reason why I'm doing that is because, why am I doing it now? I think I just want to shoot less now. Because I come out now, you get a lot better when you're shooting moments that you start shooting too many. And then when you're culling, you're like, these are nice, these are nice, but I don't want to give too many because it's just too many. So from a business perspective, I'm cutting it down. But about 15 to 20,000 is normally the number I come back with for a wedding. And you give 600? I give them 600, yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Lauren, by the way. Hi.
Sorry, what's your name?
Lauren.
Lauren, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. One of the questions earlier was, your answer was about paintings and finding a lot of your inspiration in paintings. Yeah. One of my first, real intriguing memories of finding my love of art was in Impressionism. Yes. And with the red and how it keeps your eye moving. Yeah. So that's something that I like to capture in my photos, is keeping your eye moving around the frame. Right. Now, one of my mentors, and you as well, have really amazing ways of capturing the framing. Okay. And for me, sometimes, I love all the photos that I see, but when I go to capture them, I tend to think this is going to be too distracting. Okay. This is taking away from my subject. How do I simplify it? And I find myself kind of overcompensating and just making it all too simple and not framing it in the ways that I view these lovely photos that I see, but I can't put myself out on the limb to do that myself. So I guess my question is how do you find that balance between framing it in a way that you like and not having a distracting frame? Yeah, okay. I think what I understand from your question is shooting what you want versus shooting what you think your client wants. Am I giving you what other people will see? So I guess you want it to look a particular way, but then you don't want certain things to kind of take the attention away from the main subject sort of thing. I think you just have to try. And this is why whenever, I never get it right first time. I may try a particular scene. I look at it, I'm like, this isn't working out, right? I'm not really sure. I try a different one. Then I try a different perspective. Usually, I find lighting is usually what changes everything. So say maybe my subject is too underexposed. Like you said in your example, you love the way the red looks in the frame. Maybe the red is a bit too bright. So you may need to drop down your exposure, in which case you need to up your exposure because you want the subject to be your person or thing, which isn't that red thing. So just having them there in the background is always an accent to the story. So I would try different things to bring out the story of what I'm trying to say. Does that help? It does. Yeah? All right, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, right here?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so one question is, how do you perfect the timing of your shots?
Shooting a lot. I'm serious. Ra-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. I'm serious, that's how you perfect it. And then eventually you start getting better. I mean, now it takes, for me to get a moment, it takes me about 4 or 5 shots. For the first example, you saw I took 88 different frames to get that. That's also because I'm hunting and I'm not sure where the moment is. Another thing, again, I'm not doing is I'm not doing this, chimping. I get the exposure and I just keep clicking. In fact, people always take my camera and they take a shot and they look and it doesn't come up. And they're like, what's up with the screen? I'm like, oh, I turned it off. And the reason why is I just don't want to be distracted by what's in the camera. I just want to take the picture. So once I got the exposure right, I focus on that and I just keep, because the light's not changing. So there's no need, I don't need to keep looking at the back of the camera because the light's not changing. It's the same light. So I just keep doing that and focus on that. And being present, you get what you want. And there's this thing I call border patrol. And border patrol essentially is when you are looking at your borders as you're capturing the moment, right? I don't focus on the subject. I let the subject do its thing, and I just keep looking at the borders because the subject is always in the frame, but I just don't want things chopping in and out. And that's actually that's the mistake most people do. They focus solely on the subject. Finally, before we go on, I don't like reactive shooting, which is, you see something, ooh, shoot. You should already be there. The time it takes your hands to move up, to take the shot, the moment's already over. You should be here already, and you should have kind of gotten a sense of what's going to happen before it happens. Does that make sense? So you're shooting before it's happening, and then Bob comes by, and you're like, snap, 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 snap. And then he goes, and you don't go, oh, let me check. No, you just stay there. In fact, I leave that review time to when I get back home to now look through the day and go, wow, let's see what the day was like. Because if I start doing that, then I just lose focus on what's going on. Great? Great. Oh. Sorry?
I'm Moshel.
Hi, Moshel.
Hi, how are you? I think you're like my photography twin because the way, yes. I say this because the way you frame things very much reminds me of myself. I'm like, my friends call me a weirdo, and I love that. Because I like to find the strangest way to capture a moment.
Right.
And I want you to feel something from my photos. So my question to you is, what do you set out for people to feel from your photography?
I want people to be inspired. I come from a country called Nigeria, and the story of most African countries isn't great around the world, but then people go to a lot of African countries and get a different story. And I just feel it's my duty to inspire them with the things that I see. I photograph a lot of, you can call it black people. I always say to people, when I moved to the US, I never knew I was black. Sorry, but altogether. But it's just not something we say when we're in England. And then I realized that a lot of, even within African Americans, don't know very much about some of these things. So I just want to use it to inspire them. And I want to send great messages to them. So that's really my focus. It's like, okay, let me go out there, let me travel around the world, let me show these images from my perspective as someone who's of this culture and show that perspective as well. You can call it that, yes. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Jide, that was amazing.
Thank you so much. Thank you.